I stopped halfway through chapter 1 yesterday, so I'm going to continue from chapter 1 today. When young Abe returned to New Salem, his first priority was to decide on a career, like an occupation, what he was going to do for a job. So far, he admitted, he had been nothing more than a piece of floating driftwood. He needed to choose a career and earn a steady income. He thought for a while about becoming a blacksmith. That job required great strength, and Lincoln had it to spare. But a life of physical labor was not for him. He knew enough about such work, he joked, to know he did not love it. Instead, Lincoln worked for a time in the local post office and then tried his hand at surveying. Later, he opened a grocery store, but it winked out, as he described its failure, saddling him with a large debt that took him years to pay off. Despite these crushing disappointments, he continued to read. He studied grammar and memorized the poems of Robert Burns and monologues from plays of William Shakespeare. He started reading newspapers and grew especially interested in politics. He became friends with neighbors who lent him still more books and encouraged him to better himself. Lincoln soon found his true calling. He was extremely popular and cared about his community and neighbors. He wanted to better their lives, to give them a fair chance, just as the Declaration of Independence had promised everyone. So he decided to become a politician and run for a seat in the Illinois State Assembly. While doing so, he began to study law too. In those days, most law students read the required legal books on their own without the help of teachers or formal classes. Only a handful of them went to an actual law school. Lincoln taught himself to be a lawyer entirely on his own. His first campaign for political office was interrupted, however, when an Indian chief named Black Hawk marched 500 Sac and Fox warriors into Illinois in 1832, breaking the terms of a recent treaty. Like many excited young men in his neighborhood, Lincoln quickly joined the local militia and marched off to defend the state. Lincoln's own grandfather, also named Abraham Lincoln, had been murdered by Indians years earlier in Kentucky. It is likely that Abe remembered the stories of his violent death when he decided to enlist. Although Lincoln had no military experience at all, to his surprise, as he put it, his fellow soldiers elected him as their company captain. This honor delighted Lincoln. It was a success, he said, which gave me more pleasure than any I have had since. Still, Lincoln and his men never saw much action during the Black Hawk War. Yes, sir, he later joked, in the days of the Black Hawk War, I fought, bled, and came away. He never saw any live fighting Indians, he joked, but I had a good many bloody struggles against the mosquitoes. Lincoln rather liked military life. Most of the time, the soldiers did little more than idle their time in a sitting or horizontal posture, one fellow volunteer recalled. They had no battles, but plenty of plays and songs. Lincoln especially enjoyed the athletic contests with both red boys and white. He rarely lost a wrestling match or a swimming race. When their terms of service came to an end, most of his friends returned home, but Lincoln signed up several more times, even though he once again became only a private, and the war cost him time needed to campaign for the state assembly. By the time Chief Black Hawk called off his invasion, ending the war, Lincoln had only a short time left before Election Day. In the end, the town of New Salem awarded their popular neighbor almost all of its votes, but few people in the rest of the district knew him yet, and Lincoln lost the election. It was the first and only time he would remember that he was ever beaten by the people. Actually, the war had brought out something important in Lincoln's character, his respect for all people, regardless of race. One night, the soldiers in his outfit were awakened from their sleep when an elderly Indian innocently approached their campfire. The poor old man was hungry and desperate to get something to eat, but the soldiers were so bored by the lack of action during the so-called war that they began shouting that they should execute the Indian. It was Lincoln who came to the frightened man's rescue. He announced to the other soldiers that if they wanted to harm the old man, they would have to get through him first. Lincoln was already known as the strongest soldier in camp and the best wrestler. The gang pulled down and backed off. Thanks to Lincoln, they did the elderly man no harm. Instead, they fed their starving visitor and sent him on his way. When he returned home to stay, Lincoln successfully earned his law license and on his second try for office won a seat in the Illinois Assembly. In the capital city of Vandalia, Lincoln began to work closely with the other members of his political party, the Whigs. That's with a capital W, Whigs, W-H-I-G-S, introducing laws to build roads, bridges, and canals to connect the rural state. Though his clothes looked shoddy and his appearance seemed odd, the awkward freshman assemblyman quickly made a tremendous impression on his better-educated, better-dressed colleagues. He enjoyed life in the capital, but he was lonely. He had earlier developed a serious crush on a pretty New Salem girl named Anne Rutledge, daughter of the local bookkeeper. Not everyone agrees about whether their friendship ever blossomed into a true love affair. Anne was engaged to another man who headed off to New York State to conduct some business before their marriage. He never returned. Lincoln was shy with women and might have felt comfortable only with a girl who was already promised to another man. The relationship came with no pressure. But then young Anne suddenly took sick and died. Lincoln grew so despondent he nearly had a nervous breakdown. He could not get Anne out of his mind. He spent endless hours weeping at her fresh grave, worrying about how she might feel when it rained. Friends thought he would never recover from his loss. Only after a long period of mourning was Lincoln able to resume his life and work. I'm going to stop there for today.